So, welcome to our second episode of Silver Service at the Cattle Show. Today, I welcome Phil Haynes, another one of my ex-colleagues from many years past gone. Phil and I worked together for, I guess it was probably what, 3.5 years at Talent. Awesome time. And somebody who I've, grown to love and respect as a confidant in the marketplace. So, Phil, why don't you kick us off? Give us a bit of an introduction to yourself.
John, it's so great to see your face and to hang out with you like we used to do. And yeah, so my name is Phil Haynes. I'm a TA leader currently at a small software company called Amplitude. Have about 32 years. Oh, I can't believe I'm saying that. In the business, in the recruiting industry, started in 1992. Have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and certainly I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts with you and the listeners around what's going on in this crazy hiring market that we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, we were just literally talking about that. I mean, how the market has shifted. I think sort of since just post-COVID time. I think it was like 12 months after COVID, like the market really sort of went a bit like I don't think we'd ever seen stuff like that happen, like where it was such a candidate and employer-driven market. There was so many roles, so many candidates in the marketplace. And I think it's really gone really skewed now in terms of, you know, what we were saying actually before we started clicking record, right? In terms of when you see roles right now with like 600 applicants. So I'm hoping what today we'll kind of discuss a little bit how people can navigate that. What are your thoughts? What are your predictions on the marketplace right now? What's kind of hot, what's not, and so on and so forth. So I get what are you seeing currently? What's your thoughts? What's your takeaways currently?
Yeah, it's an interesting, having again been through the dot-com crash, been through the financial collapse in 2008, and seen the TA market just generally get decimated, and see this shift from employer-driven to candidate-driven. This one feels very different because I do believe it's whiplash. I think it's a significant whiplash from what we saw in 2021, 2022, coming out of COVID, where companies thought everybody was going to be working from home forever, ordering food in with DoorDash and some of these delivery services, getting their groceries delivered, where everybody was. And it was a go time for small companies at that time. And, having been at Zoom at that time during the growth of the pandemic, we tripled the company. I
Yeah.
left Zoom and went to a company called Nubank, where again, we hired 3,000 people in a year. Like there was this tremendous amount of over exuberance at the executive level in corporate America. And then when that started to not happen and people started to go back to the office and they went to grocery stores and they went out to eat and all of the things that we now are back to somewhat what was normal in 2019, they just feel like they way overhired. They have too much headcount, which is the biggest expense at most companies. So we're seeing that as the cause of where we are today. I think how we come out of this is a very interesting topic to discuss, because not like before, what we saw is we saw the rebounds. So we see this pendulum swing, right? And then we always saw after the dot-com crash, everybody was like, oh, tech is screwed. Oh, well, no, actually, tech came back strong. Oh, the financial collapse. Oh, banks are screwed. No, actually,
Yeah.
banks came back strong. So I think we will see the pendulum swing back.
Mm.
But I do think right now, as a job seeker, the most critical thing. So I think there are two aspects of this. I think first of all, if you're running a TA organization, and I am, and I say this to my team all the time, you've got to not let everybody through the front door. And what does that look like? We have AI. We've always had the ability to ask some pre-screening questions on an
Mm.
application and create some of those that are just knockouts, where it's just
Yeah.
not going to be a fit. Location, education, those types of things. So I think utilizing technology on the front end of this stack will prevent people from getting through the front door and creating that hope or that ghosting and that terrible
Yeah.
candidate experience. I would rather have someone apply to one of my jobs and within 24 hours get a note that says, hey, it's not going to work out, sorry about that, than to go and apply and either not hear from us,
Mhm.
or even worse, hear from us, get put in a process and never hear from us because
Yeah,
we
yeah,
just can't handle the inflow. So I think we own it in TA as far as like preventing everybody from coming through the door. But I also think as a job seeker, there is a heightened sense of reality that job seekers need to apply to their self-awareness.
mm,
And this is a really tough thing. It's always been a tough thing, John. You and I went through it a lot when we were doing the branding efforts at Talent, and we were
yeah.
saying, hey, how do we discourage the wrong people from applying and encourage the right people to apply? And again, it's like driving self-awareness in a job seeker is really,
Yeah,
really critical.
yeah. I think it's actually, it reminds me of a project I worked on years ago with a major phone company. I will leave it at that in terms of, this idea of um the awareness from candidates' perspective of who applies to that type of company. Because I think what they
Mm-hmm,
were looking at was like, hey, do you know what? We want people who don't necessarily love our product, but people who are open to other products in the market, because that's how we innovate, right? We
mm-hmm,
don't want the people that kind of queue for hours and hours and hours, because it's a tough business to work in. And I think that's where the self-awareness when it comes to applying to things is being really aware of what you are applying to. I think it's, I've spoken to people recently of one of the issues that they found where they've had 800 applicants for a role, and they're like, how can you manage that? Like even AI, like is going to struggle with that amount of messiness in terms of CVs coming through and applications and so on and so forth. So it's like, how do you deal with that? And I've said to them, right, what's your approach in terms of putting the job out there into the marketplace? And they're like, well, we put on Easy Apply on LinkedIn, which was a really good tool to have when the market was a little bit quieter, because the people that weren't necessarily hunting for jobs, might pop up and they go, oh, John, that's interesting. I'll just float my CV over there. But it's actually created this influx because, you can kind of wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go, oh, that looks interesting. Apply, apply. And you're not really reading through the CV
mm-hmm,
necessarily.
mm-hmm.
And I guess that creates this influx of applicants. So I think my advice to people is, if you're looking at being selective, almost like trying to look at those roles that really fit to you, and actually then start to, as I've done, where you apply to something and you kind of go, well, who do I know in that organization? Why do I want to work for that organization? Why do I respect? Do I need to do a cold reach out to somebody within the organization? Whereas if a lot of applications don't come with cover letters or whatever it may be, and I'm kind of in this pendulum point of like, do I agree with cover letters or not? And I'm like, well, there's a place for them, but I'm also, like it's jumping through hoops point. And I think this question, if it's like those drop down boxes of questions, those are a really good way to kind of, for people to go through and go, right, do I really fit to this role, right?
Yeah.
So I think being aware
Yeah,
of
I think
that.
it's really critical. And you're taking me back because I was actually in Charlotte, North Carolina during the banking collapse and in 2008. And it's a banking center. And so there
Mm,
were hundreds of people, thousands of people that were out of work in
yeah,
my
yeah.
town. And I actually spent a lot of time in my spare time coaching people on how to craft their CVs, and it was all about the value. And I think what you're nailing is that look at the site. This is we're using a sourcing tool here at Amplitude that allows us to pinpoint people who have worked at certain size companies,
Mm,
people who have seen this level of growth. So I'll just share an example. My company is a $260 million revenue company. We're growing to 500 million. In most of our roles, we want people who have seen that growth,
yeah, yeah.
right? We don't want the people who have only ever worked at Microsoft, and we
Hmm.
don't want the Series B startup people either. We want people who have worked at a public company, grown it in their domain from 250 million to 500 million, whether that's a recruiter seeing that growth or whether that's a financial analyst seeing that growth. But it's that growth period and that moment in the company's time that you need to match. So people don't
Mm.
think about that. People don't think about, and I'm not a believer in cover letters. I don't think people read them. I don't think that, I think it's a very individual thing.
Yeah.
I think if you craft a CV that in the first, you've got 7 seconds,
Hmm.
right? When my recruiters look at a CV, any recruiters, they go 7 to 10 seconds, they scan. What are they scanning for? They're scanning for
Yeah.
the tidbits of information that the hiring manager put in their heads. And it's typically 5 or 6 bullet points of value that they're looking for this person to bring to the role. You have to nail that value. You have to
Hmm.
know what your value is, what value you've brought in the past, and you've got to highlight that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really interesting. I was coaching an old school recruiter, someone that I've recruited with for many years. He's actively employed. He's like, I don't want to look around, but I'm wondering, if I did look around, what's going on in the market for recruiters? And what I'm seeing in the market for recruiters is that, like, what I was telling him is that you grew up in recruiting when recruiting was all about quality, value, all about getting the right person in the job to make a difference at the company. Today, a lot of recruiting is putting a butt in a chair, right? And a lot of recruiters, unfortunately, today that are actively employed are in this motion of just worrying about filling recs.
Yeah.
And that's the value that they perceive they bring to the company. I'm trying to shift that in my
Mm.
current company because I think if we don't shift that value, TA is always going to go through this up and down. If I don't need people, I don't need recruiters. If I don't need people, I don't need recruiters.
Mm.
Whereas if you shift that to where I need the best people out there, and my recruiting team has a history of hiring the best people out, finding me the best people, I don't want to let them go
No.
because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find those best people. So the value, we have to start talking in value. What value do you bring to the company as an employee, and demonstrate that? You have to
Yeah.
demonstrate that in 7 seconds, which is not an easy thing to do.
No. I think with that as well, I mean, when shifting gears a little bit to kind of more the internal sort of point, but I guess it's kind of pulling the curtain back for people who are looking for roles. I mean, I think one of the key things that I've been, there's tools that I've been working with various sort of founders and within the TA space, and I do think that there is a better way than doing just the traditional CV. But I still haven't kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are companies that I found that are working on things like video CVs and stuff like that, and they're still early stages. But I do think maybe talking 5, 10 years time as that next generation, that kind of TikTok generation or Instagram generation
Mm-hmm.
that's used to video, being on video and being part of that, I think is a really interesting shift on what we'll see as the marketplace shifts. But what I was going to say there in terms of pulling the curtain back a little bit was this idea of that the way TA operates within an organization. I think the data that it can bring to executives and that that leadership level in terms of understanding where the business sits in the marketplace, what is going on outside of that. I mean, a company obviously is focused on selling its product or its services or whatever may be, but the insights of this shift of how HR and talent, I'm not even going to say talent acquisition, but talent as a general sort of term is kind of not departing each other, but it kind of needs to separate. And I think it's what I've sort of said to founders recently is it's really, I think, the birth of the chief talent officer or the growth of the chief strategy officer in terms of a slightly different version of that. But I think it is this chief talent officer of that insights that people can bring, that recruiters bring from being on the front line. But then it's also like you're saying there of how TA leaders need to step up and show the difference that talent acquisition teams make. I mean, I've talked about this over the last couple of years with you and with Lance, who was on our first episode, in terms of right, what do you do when the business is not hiring like crazy? Recruiters
Mm-hmm.
need to step up at that point of like building relationships, but then it's also on the candidates to sort of say, right, start building relationships with those recruiters that you can reach out to and just say, hey, I'm interested in your company. I'd like to find out some more, because those are your talent communities. And I think they do away with then, okay, you might still legally be required to post the rollout, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's, you know, where your pool is coming from, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the proactive talent identification is a cornerstone of what we have to transition to from a TA perspective, which, like you said, today seems ridiculous. Like, why would we need to create talent pools? All you have to do is post a job and get 500 applicants. But I think the fascinating thing about this, and I have this conversation on a regular basis with recruiters and TA leaders, is that yeah, you can get today a tremendous amount of inbound people, and yet it's still only 33% of the market,
Yeah,
right? And so again, if I'm standing in front of my chief revenue officer and he looks me in the eye and he says, "Are you bringing me the best sales reps
mhm,
available?" And all we're waiting through the people that applied to the job instead of going out and tapping the shoulders of the high performers at our competitors, I can't say yes. And
yeah,
so that goes across the board, right? And so again, I think this is a tough moment when you're a job seeker, because yes, you have a lot of competition in the market, but it's the competition that you don't see that is truly the
mhm,
competition that I think we should be creating from a TA perspective, which
yeah,
is there's a lot of good talent and we've seen an uptick. I mean, even in engineering right here in the Silicon Valley, our engineering applicants, the quality of these applicants is through the roof. And that's
mhm,
because of, a lot of the layoffs and a lot of the people.
yeah,
But we can't rely on that, right? There will be a pendulum swing. It will swing back. Great news for recruiters who can hang in there, because we will see the market come back and everybody will start to hire recruiters again and rebuild their TA departments when we go back to competing for talent. Right now, you never hear anybody talking about competing for talent, do you? I mean, we grew up in that mode, right?
definitely. I mean, my one, when I first started in recruitment, which was back in 2007, it was a case of like, it was all about relationships. It was a case of like building that talent pool. If you tried to, post out a job, you probably get a handful of applicants. And it wasn't that they weren't, that was a very difficult time in the marketplace. It was during the financial crisis. People were
Yeah.
where I was based at the time out in Tokyo. It was a case of like people were like, I'm not moving, I'm staying. If I'm comfortable and I'm
Oh, yeah.
I'm secure in my role, I'm not moving. So it was like unless you had those relationships with people, I instilled with it with talent teams in the past of like if you're hiring for sales, I don't know what it is with companies when they kind of go, right, when are we going to hire salespeople? It's like right in the end of Q4, the beginning of Q1. It's like when are salespeople most busy? End of Q4, beginning of Q1, right? So it's like, how do you can't, if you can't shift your hiring time frame to like a May time frame when people are kind of out there looking, they're maybe, they're feeling like, okay, my territory isn't right, or my expectation on my bonus isn't there, or my the amount I'm being told to go out and sell is just unrealistic. Like that's the point where you build relationships with people, and if you can build those relationships, they're probably like I think I worked it out, it was about 50% more likely to pick up the phone to you if you call them in Q4 if you've already
Yeah.
had a conversation with them. And I think that was the great recruiters that I knew, and what I used to instill in my sourcing team was it's like, look, stop thinking about what I'm recruiting for now and go out and build relationships. And I think that's what TA teams need to be doing right now is thinking and being aware of, right, what do I consistently hire for? What are the
Mm.
difficult roles that I hire for? And take those two avenues and go, right, let me start building relationships. Because while, yes, the influx is there, I think, a lot of people at the minute seem to be talking about candidate experience, and that is 100% the biggest thing that the industry needs to shift on right now. But from a recruiter's perspective, I think what they need to be able to do is figure out, right, when times are really busy, how do I free up my time? And I do that by building those talent communities, by building relationships, having the the relationship with hiring managers. There's all these things that are time-saving elements. And I think people out searching in the marketplace right now can help themselves by being proactive in doing that as well, right?
Right. Yeah. Connecting with recruiters has always been a
Mm,
great strategy. I mean, for a job seeker,
yeah,
third party recruiters, even recruiters at companies, right?
yeah.
Like, and again, you said this a few minutes ago about, knowing your sweet spot.
Mm,
One of the things I've learned in the last many years in tech is that through the growth cycle of a company from a Series A funded stealth startup to a publicly traded $1 billion revenue company,
mm,
there are people that fit sweet spots of that
Yeah.
growth pattern.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you've got to slot yourself in there. And so doing the research and saying, it's interesting because I get a lot of outreach on LinkedIn, and it's, they reach out to
Mm,
candidate job seekers, reach out to me and say, hey, I saw your posting of this, I think I'd be
mm,
a great fit. If I got somebody who's reached out to me and said, hey, I don't see anything that fits my background at the
mm.
company, but I'm fascinated with what Amplitude is doing. And I
Yeah.
would love to be in a talent pool and just be aware of what you guys are doing and get to know the company and know people at the company. That's a
Yeah.
completely different approach, right? Now,
Yeah. Yeah.
again, it's not going to get you a job tomorrow. And I think there is a lot of real, honest fear and somewhat
Mm,
desperation in the market right now for people who've been out of work for a year. And we
mm.
see it in our LinkedIn feeds every day, and my heart goes out to these people. So I
Yeah.
think that desperation, though, is one of the things I used to coach people in 2008. Like, you cannot let that desperation go. This is your
Mm,
Emmy award winning acting, right? It is confidence and security and
mm.
calmness, and it's when you come across as a little bit desperate. And then again, candidate experience, you get a candidate experience survey, you didn't get invited to an interview, and then you feel this is a moment to vent. That's not a great
No.
look, right? And again, I'm very focused on candidate experience right now.
Mm.
We're doing everything that we can to increase it every chance we get. Make
Yeah.
sure that everybody that we let through the front door has a good experience, because I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's the key. It's I always use this analogy of a party, right? If you're having a party at your house, which by the way is beautiful in the background right now, if you're having a
It's a
party at your
mess.
house, and word gets out into the neighborhood that you're having a party at your house, you're going to stand at your front door and you're going to let those people in that you want to come in, because you
Yeah.
know that they're not going to beat up the house, they're not going to steal your liquor, they're not going to, whatever your criteria is. And unfortunately, with our ATS systems, we're not doing that, and we need
No.
to stand at the front door and let those people in that we can be better, have a better opportunity of giving a good experience to, because
Mm.
we've already kind of pre-screened that they're going to be a good fit, right? Instead of letting everybody in. As a recruiter, I would never want my recruiters to go through 500
No.
resumes. They just won't do it.
No.
10 seconds a resume, that is a huge amount of time when
Yeah.
you've got 15 jobs on your plate. If you got
Yeah. Yeah.
500 people against each, that's all you're doing. You're not building talent communities. You're not, getting to build relationships with people. You're not spending quality, you're doing quantity. And that's what we
Yeah.
have to shift, right?
Yeah. 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 I agree. I mean, I don't, what, in terms of that, what would be your prediction for 2024, looking at how do you think that is going to shift? Do you see that shifting in 2024? Do you see that as a later shift?
The shift of letting people in the front door, just the shift in the
Well,
market
more
in
more just
general.
shift of just the market in general in terms of the
Yeah.
number of applicants that we're seeing in for roles. I mean, even I think, I think when we started to add in questions years ago, within roles that we would put out, it was a case of you'll always get people that kind of gamify that process, right? And that they'll
Yeah.
they'll just figure out a way around it, whatever it may be. What are your thoughts in terms of how do you think this not lull because it's not a lull. How do you think this kind of like this this just growth scale like can work like this? Because like we said before, it's like a candidate driven market. It's also an employer driven market. There are a lot of roles. I mean, I think in the last probably sort of month, I would say, I mean, the amount of roles that I'm seeing posted out there is crazy. I mean, there is a ton more activity out there from employers' side. So they're obviously seeing the uptick, or there's that optimism of seeing the uptick. But
Yeah.
there's also still a bunch of layoffs happening. There's still a lot of people. I think somewhere I read there's like 100,000 people open to work, and I'm sure it's a hell of a lot more than that within North America alone. When do you think that is going to shift? When's that seesaw going to sort of either level out or kind of sway back one way or the other?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And again, I come from a very tech centric point of view. So healthcare is still very strong. If you're a healthcare recruiter, you're probably actively employed, and nurses are still in high demand. Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of areas outside of tech have. So when I answer that, I'm going to answer from a very tech centric perspective. I think we need to go back to some innovation. Like, we really haven't seen a lot of innovation in the tech industry, in my experience. Like, I think the last innovate, we went digital banking, we went DoorDash, order a car to your door, order food to your door, order delivery stuff. We've seen little pockets, but even like self-driving cars. I mean, I sit in the office in San Francisco on a corner, very busy corner, and I sit there and watch these self-driving autonomous cars come up to the stoplight and move through. And I've seen several of them like break down there and just go into this, unplug and replug your router kind of mode. And a couple companies have been disinvited from driving on the San Francisco streets. So I just think that there's now AI is like the new buzzword. But again, I don't know what AI is a component of a bigger solution. I don't know that it's a solution in and of itself. So I think we need some innovation. I think that the job market does look like it's coming back. I think this year is going to be another really weird year, but hopefully better than last year for job seekers. But we've got an election going on in the United States, so it's always going to be one of those things where everybody's like, "Oh my God, what the hell is going on in the United States?" So I think from a global economy perspective, we're probably not going to go back into somewhat more normal feeling until probably 2025, just because still a lot of uncertainty. Now, again, like you said, a lot more jobs seem to be coming on. I think the layoffs that we're seeing today are really companies still having just. Here's my fear actually is that CEOs and board of directors are saying, okay, we need to continue to show margins to the street, and the best way to get margins is to reduce people. And I think it's a very short-sighted way to show a margin, because then you're not innovating, then you're not putting out product, then you're not selling product if you're reducing all of that, or you're not supporting those teams that do because you've decided to reduce G&A. So I do think that there's some reaction to the market here that corporate America is gamifying a little bit, but I do think that things will settle down as we start to come into November, December of this year, and hopefully next year it'll be like, okay, everybody will have a confidence, interest rates, inflation, all the things that have been the macroeconomic, as they say, situation will hopefully improve. I don't know what's going to happen with the two wars that are going on right now, because I think that's another thing that's really affecting just the economy in general, and therefore the job market as a result of that. So I'm a little bit more cautious about this year. I still know that there are jobs available. We're hiring. A lot of companies are still hiring. Some of it is backfill hiring. And that backfill is both voluntary and involuntary attrition. Involuntary due to performance, voluntary because people are going and getting other jobs. So I think we're still seeing a fairly steady demand for recruiting at Amplitude and across in a lot of corporate America, just because there is a natural attrition number there that's allowing us to bring in different talent and bring in new talent.
There's that usual movement, that usual attrition that we see in the marketplace. It's like say, I think there are certain pockets that are still affected. Maybe the optimism isn't there. But it's like I think with the I don't think the market is necessarily, like say, it's not pessimistic right now. It's kind of just
Yeah.
going, let's just kind of see where this goes. Like I
Yep.
think
Yep.
that there's so much going on in the world right now that is difficult for companies to kind of go, right, we need to hyper growth, or we need to focus on this, or
Right.
whatever it may be. But it's like say, if you can't build it, sell it, and support it, then you're always going to struggle, right? So
That's
there's
right.
always going to
That's
be that
right.
need. There's always going to be attrition in an organization. So I think that people kind of keeping an eye out on what is going there. And like we said before, building those relationships with people in those companies, that is your sweet spot. I think that would probably be my key takeaway from this conversation, is knowing where your sweet spot is. I think it's probably one of the
Yeah.
best bit of advices that we've kind of been given here today. I think what's interesting there, where you talk a little bit about AI, and I've got a call with I've got an episode that's going to be happening, I think next episode or the episode after, around
Uh-huh.
AI tools and how people can navigate those AI tools. And I think, we'll talk a lot about how to knowing your sweet spot and figuring out how do you actually overcome if that company is using an AI tool to make sure that you are being picked out as one of the key candidates in there. So I'll definitely bring that up with that individual. That's Dave Mendoza, who I'm pretty sure you
Oh
know as
yeah.
well. So
Definitely no Dave. Yep.
it's a
Yep.
very small
Yep.
community, right? So I think it's been a lot of fun having a conversation with you today. I hope you will come back again. We'll have another conversation, because I know you and I, as with everybody that I've had on this show so far, and that I'm having, on in the future, you're all people that we could spend hours talking about this stuff, right? So
Yes.
I think,
Yep.
it will be a lot of fun in terms of seeing how the market shifts, what happens, and I
Yeah.
think we'll just be keeping a close eye on what's going on. Anything you want to add? Anything as a key takeaway for people?
No, no, I think we've really kind of nailed it with self-awareness, really knowing the value that you bring and being able to articulate that quickly on your CV, and then really just applying to those companies and those areas that you can make an impact. Because I think that's the most important thing is that people are looking for people to come in and make impact, and so being able
Yeah,
to demonstrate that's really critical. So I've enjoyed it, John. I've really enjoyed it, like I always do. It's great to reconnect.
definitely.
Yeah, let's do it again soon.
Appreciate it, and thank you very much.